Chapter 1. Breaking the Cycle of Not Being Enough. Think about a moment when you achieved something you had been striving toward for years. You finally crossed the finish line. You got the promotion, you moved into the house, you married the partner, or you reached the number in your bank account that was supposed to finally let you breathe. You probably felt a rush of euphoria. You felt for a fleeting moment that you had finally arrived, but how long did it last? For most of us, that warm glow fades terrifyingly fast. By the next morning, or perhaps even that same evening, a familiar, quiet dread creeps back in. A voice whispers that you now have to maintain this success, that you are still somehow falling short in another area of your life, that you are an imposter, and that if people really knew you, they would see you are entirely inadequate. This is not just a passing thought. It is an invisible prison. It is a trance. We move through our days in a waking dream where the primary narrative is our own deficiency. We go to the grocery store, we sit in traffic, we lie in bed next to the people we love, but we are not actually present in those moments. We are trapped in a mental courtroom where we serve as both the ruthless prosecutor and the exhausted defendant. We constantly review our mistakes, analyze our awkward conversations, and obsess over our physical flaws. We exhaust ourselves trying to prove our worth to a world that we feel is constantly judging us. This persistent feeling of being fundamentally flawed isolates us. It creates a thick, transparent wall between us and the rest of humanity. We smile, we nod, we perform our daily roles, but inside we often feel achingly lonely, convinced that we are the only ones who feel this broken. To survive this unbearable pain of inadequacy, we develop lifelong coping strategies. We throw ourselves into endless self-improvement projects. We restrict our diets. We push our bodies to the point of breaking. We work 80-hour weeks, and we buy things we do not need to project an image of effortless success. We stay perpetually busy because slowing down means risking a catastrophic collision with our own emptiness. We play it safe, terrified that trying something new and failing will expose our incompetence to the world. Alternatively, we turn our pain outward. We become fiercely critical of others, operating under the subconscious belief that if we can keep pointing out their flaws, our own will remain safely hidden in the shadows. These strategies might look like ambition, discipline, or discerning taste to the outside world, but they are driven by the terrified, frantic energy of someone running from a burning building. And the greatest tragedy is that these very strategies reinforce our prison. Every time we desperately try to hide a part of ourselves, we send a deeply toxic message to our own psyche that we are, in fact, unacceptable. How do we break this exhausting cycle? We have been conditioned to assume that the cure for feeling inadequate is to finally become perfect. We believe that if we just fix our flaws, control our turbulent emotions, and achieve enough milestones, we will finally earn our right to be happy. We treat our lives like a grueling redemption project, but true freedom operates completely counter to this instinct. The way out of the cage is not to fight the bars. The way out is to turn around and accept absolutely everything about ourselves and our lives exactly as they are in this very moment. This is a profound and radical shift in how we approach our existence. It means looking directly at the parts of ourselves we have spent a lifetime hiding and running from. It means feeling the raw, uncomfortable sensations of jealousy, anger, fear, and sorrow without immediately trying to numb them, suppress them, or fix them. It requires two distinct, deeply interconnected movements of the mind and heart. The first movement is clear seeing. We must develop the capacity to recognize what is actually happening inside us without the distortion of our terrifying stories. When anxiety grips your chest, you must learn to see it simply as a physical sensation, a tightness, a fluttering, a shallow breath, rather than a catastrophic sign that you are failing at life. You must see your experience clearly, without tampering with it, judging it, or projecting it into a disastrous future. But clear seeing alone is not enough. If we look at our own pain and respond with cold, clinical detachment, or worse, with harsh judgment, we only deepen our suffering. We must pair our clear seeing with a profound, unconditional warmth. This is the second movement. We must hold our own fear, insecurity, and shame with the exact same tenderness a loving parent would offer a frightened child who has woken up from a nightmare. This is not a passive surrender. It is a fierce, courageous embrace of reality. When we meet our own brokenness with genuine kindness, the trance begins to shatter. The relentless war against ourselves finally ends. It is incredibly easy to misunderstand this kind of complete acceptance. People often resist it because they secretly believe that accepting themselves means resigning themselves to mediocrity. They think that if they accept their lack of discipline, they will never achieve anything, or if they accept their anger, they will become a permanently toxic person. But this is a fundamental illusion. Accepting where you are is not a life sentence to stay there. In fact, it is the exact opposite. You cannot genuinely change a reality you refuse to acknowledge. It is a beautiful, life-altering paradox that only when we fully accept ourselves exactly as we are, do we finally possess the clarity and the free energy required to grow. Acceptance does not mean excusing harmful behavior or giving up on our highest aspirations. It means starting from a place of grounded truth rather than a place of frantic denial. Imagine a person who is deeply dissatisfied with their career and feels entirely trapped. For years, they wake up on Monday mornings with a crushing weight on their chest. To cope with the misery of their reality, they complain endlessly. They numb themselves with television and alcohol every evening, and they constantly fantasize about a magical future where they are suddenly rescued by a perfect, effortless opportunity. They are resisting their present reality with every ounce of their energy, fighting the truth of their own unhappiness. But what if they stopped running? What if they sat down in the quiet of their room and fully accepted the devastating disappointment of their current life? What if they allowed themselves to feel the physical ache of their unfulfilled potential without judging themselves as a failure? By embracing the pain, the massive amount of energy that was being wasted on resistance is suddenly liberated. The mental fog clears. From this grounded, honest place, they are no longer reacting out of blind panic or deep shame. They can begin to make real, intentional choices. They can assess their skills, ask for help, or make a terrifying but necessary career pivot. Acceptance was not the end of their ambition. It was the fertile, necessary ground from which all genuine, transformative action grows. Our culture has conditioned us to believe that we must earn our right to exist, that we are born inherently flawed and must spend our days desperately proving our worth. But your worth is not a puzzle to be solved or a prize to be won at the end of a grueling race. It is an inherent, unchangeable truth of your existence. You do not need to change yourself to belong to this world. Breaking the cycle of not being enough starts the moment you stop fighting your own life. It starts when you drop the heavy armor, step out of the mental courtroom, and decide that you will no longer be your own worst enemy. As we journey forward, we will explore exactly how to cultivate this profound acceptance, how to pause the relentless machinery of the anxious mind, and how to reclaim the radiant, joyful life that has always been waiting for you just beneath the surface of your fears. Chapter 2. Finding True Power in the Pause. There is a terrifying instinct that kicks in when a car hits a patch of ice and begins to spin out of control. Every fiber of your being screams at you to slam your foot on the brakes and wrench the steering wheel sharply in the opposite direction. It is a desperate biological urge to regain control, to forcefully impose your will on a dangerous situation. But anyone who has driven in the winter knows that this instinctive, frantic reaction is exactly what guarantees a crash. The only way to survive the skid is to do something that feels entirely unnatural and utterly terrifying. You have to take your foot off the pedals, loosen your grip, and gently steer into the slide. You have to stop fighting the momentum and allow the vehicle to stabilize itself before you can safely guide it back onto the road. This mechanical truth mirrors the deepest psychological reality of our lives. When we feel out of control, when our sense of worth is threatened, when we are hurt, frightened, or overwhelmed, our immediate reflex is to forcefully grab the wheel. We react. We lash out with harsh words to defend ourselves. We scramble to fix mistakes by working late into the night. We obsessively plan out every detail of our futures to ward off the terrifying unknown. We distract ourselves with endless scrolling, mindless consumption, or frantic busyness to avoid feeling the sharp sting of our own anxiety. We are terrified that if we do not constantly manage, manipulate, and control our circumstances, we will fall apart. But these frantic efforts are the equivalent of slamming on the brakes while skidding on ice. They do not save us. They propel us deeper into the trance of our own unworthiness, locking us into mechanical, destructive patterns that alienate us from ourselves and the people we love. What would happen if, right in the middle of your most intense emotional skid, you consciously chose to take your hands off the wheel? What if you purposefully suspended your frantic momentum and simply stopped? This is the profound practice of the pause. A pause is a deliberate, temporary disengagement from our endless doing. It is a moment where we stop leaning desperately into the future and stop agonizing over the past. We stop trying to achieve anything, fix anything, or run away from anything. We simply drop into the exact reality of the present moment, exactly as it is, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Imagine you are sitting at your workspace, already exhausted from a relentless week, when a message arrives from a superior or a client. The tone is sharp, critical, and entirely unfair. Instantly, your body reacts. A flush of heat rises up your neck. Your chest tightens as if wrapped in iron bands. Your breath becomes shallow and rapid. Before you even have time to consciously process the emotion, your fingers are already hovering over the keyboard, aggressively typing out a defensive, furious reply. You are driven by a desperate, burning need to prove them wrong, to justify your existence, to protect your fragile sense of value. If you hit send in this state of blind reactivity, you will inevitably ignite a fire that causes real damage to your career and your peace of mind. But imagine that in this precise moment of escalating tension, you choose to pause. You literally pull your hands away from the keyboard. You push your chair back. You close your eyes. You do not try to convince yourself that you are not angry. You do not tell yourself a story about how you should be more enlightened or calm. Instead, you drop your attention entirely into your physical body. You feel the searing heat in your face. You feel the violent, rapid pounding of your heart against your ribs. You feel the immense, suffocating pressure in your throat. You allow the anger to burn within the spaciousness of your awareness without doing a single thing to act on it or suppress it. As you sit there, riding the intense wave of your own biological response, something miraculous begins to happen. Because you are not fueling the anger with a narrative of victimhood, the wave crests and naturally begins to recede. The heat dissipates. Your breathing slows. You realize that this email is not a threat to your survival. It is merely a miscommunication from another stressed human being. When you finally open your eyes, you are no longer a defensive animal reacting to a predator. You are a grounded, intelligent person, fully capable of crafting a measured, professional, and highly effective response. The pause did not make you weak. It gave you back your power. We resist the pause because it forces us to encounter the very things we spend our entire lives running from. If we stop our constant forward motion, we are forced to feel our own underlying sadness, our chronic loneliness, and the haunting whisper that we are fundamentally flawed. We use our relentless busyness as a shield against our own shadows. When we pause, we are voluntarily putting down the shield. This takes an immense amount of courage. It can feel like stepping off a cliff into the terrifying void of our own unresolved pain. But the tragedy of running from our shadows is that we can never outpace them. The harder we run, the more exhausted and terrified we become. It is only when we stop, turn around, and sit quietly with our shadows that they lose their monstrous power over us. Consider how this simple act can completely alter the landscape of our closest relationships. Think of two partners who have loved each other for years but have slowly fallen into a toxic, predictable rhythm of bickering. One person makes an offhand comment about a household chore. the other person feels the immediate familiar sting of feeling unappreciated and unloved. The defense mechanisms lock into place instantly. A sarcastic, cutting remark is fired back. The battle lines are drawn. They both know this miserable script by heart. They know exactly how the volume will escalate, how past grievances will be weaponized, how they will eventually retreat to separate rooms, and how a heavy, suffocating coldness will linger in the house for days. They are trapped in a mechanical loop of suffering. But what if, right at the precipice of the escalation, one of them chooses to pause? The initial comment is made. The sting of rejection hits. The sarcastic retort rises to the tip of their tongue, eager to be unleashed. But instead of speaking, they stop. They press their lips together. They take a deep, grounding breath. They feel the agonizing pressure of the unsaid words. They feel the incredibly tender, aching bruise of vulnerability in their chest that sits just beneath their anger. The sudden silence in the room is stark and disorienting. The other partner, braced for the usual counterattack, is left standing in the quiet, unsure of what is happening. In that profound, courageous pause, the endless cycle of mechanical warfare is completely shattered. The person who paused is no longer a defensive combatant. They have reclaimed their humanity. From this grounded, deeply honest space, the defensive armor falls away. Instead of attacking, they might find the strength to look at their partner and say, in a quiet voice, that they are feeling incredibly overwhelmed and hurt. The entire trajectory of their evening, and perhaps the long-term health of their relationship, is altered in an instant. This is the sheer, undeniable magic of stopping. The pause is not a technique to suppress our emotions or to turn us into unfeeling, passive observers of our own lives. It is a profound act of hospitality to our own inner wilderness. It is the moment we stop treating our feelings as enemies to be conquered or problems to be solved, and instead treat them as natural, passing weather systems in the vast sky of our awareness. Music is not created by a continuous, unending wall of sound. A melody only exists because of the rests, the intentional spaces of silence between the notes. Without the pause, there is no rhythm, no shape, and no beauty. Our lives are the same. Without the pause, we are just a continuous, frantic noise, reacting blindly to a world that feels overwhelmingly demanding. When we learn to take our hands off the controls, even for just a few seconds, we slip through the bars of our own self-made prisons. We step out of the trance of unworthiness and return to the vibrant, living reality of the present moment. In the quiet space of the pause, we remember who we really are. Chapter 3. The Art of Unconditional Warmth. Once you have learned to pause, you will inevitably encounter a terrifying realization. When the frantic forward motion of your life finally stops, the dust settles, and you look inward, you might not like what you see. The pause strips away our distractions and leaves us face to face with our raw, unfiltered humanity. You might see a mind that is petty and judgmental. You might feel a heart that is heavy with ancient, unacknowledged grief, or burning with an irrational jealousy you thought you had outgrown. You might confront a deep, shivering insecurity that makes you feel like a frightened child masquerading as a competent adult. When these uncomfortable realities surface, our deeply conditioned reflex is to recoil. We instantly turn these feelings into enemies. We judge them, we despise them, and we wage a silent, bitter war against our own internal landscape. But clear seeing is only half of the equation. If we look at our own pain and respond with a harsh, critical eye, we only deepen the very trance we are trying to escape. To truly heal, we must meet whatever arises within us with a spirit of profound, unconditional warmth. We must learn to become a genuine friend to ourselves. Imagine you are standing in front of a crowded room, preparing to deliver a presentation that could define your career. You have rehearsed for weeks. You know the material flawlessly, but as you look out at the sea of expectant faces, your mind goes completely, horrifyingly blank. The silence stretches. Your heart begins to hammer against your ribs like a trapped bird. In this agonizing moment, the instinctive reaction is a violent internal rejection. You mentally scream at yourself to snap out of it. You feel a crushing wave of humiliation and try to forcefully push it down, pasting on a rigid smile while panic floods your nervous system. You are fighting a war against your own mind, and that very resistance makes the panic exponentially worse. But what if, in that terrifying silence, you did not declare war? What if you took a quiet breath, recognized the absolute chaos erupting in your chest, and bowed to it? Imagine simply acknowledging, with total internal kindness, that you are incredibly frightened right now. You do not judge yourself as weak. You do not catastrophize about losing your job. You simply offer a gentle internal nod to the very human experience of freezing under pressure. By meeting your terror with warmth instead of hostility, you strip the moment of its secondary layer of suffering, the shame of being afraid. When you stop fighting the fear, it loses its paralyzing grip. The tension releases just enough for you to take a breath, find your notes, and begin speaking. You do not conquer the fear by destroying it, you disarm it by welcoming it. To cultivate this kind of radical friendliness, we must practice the art of gentle inquiry. When we feel overwhelmed, instead of launching into a frantic analysis of why we feel so terrible or whose fault it is, we can drop our attention into our bodies and softly ask, what is happening inside me right now? What is asking for my attention? Think of a person who has just watched their life's work collapse. Perhaps they poured their entire savings, their identity, and years of grueling labor into a business venture that ultimately failed. They are carrying a crushing, suffocating weight of ruin. They cannot sleep. Their stomach is tied in permanent knots. They avoid their friends, utterly convinced that everyone views them as an incompetent failure. They spend their days torturing themselves with stories of how they should have seen the warning signs, how they have ruined their family's future, and how they will never recover. They are entirely lost in a dark, punishing trance. To break this cycle, they must sit alone in the quiet of their room and practice inquiry. They must intentionally step beneath the endless, cruel monologue of their mind and focus on the physical reality of their pain. They ask themselves, what wants attention right now? They listen to the aching in their chest and the shallow, ragged rhythm of their breath. And then they name it. They do not use harsh clinical labels or dramatic accusations. They use a whisper of recognition. They mentally note heavy, ashamed, terrified, failure. They note these words with the exact same tenderness they would use to comfort a devastated friend. This practice of soft naming is profoundly liberating. Naming the pain strips it of its monstrous, overwhelming anonymity. It transforms an invisible, life-ruining force into a passing emotional weather system. It is simply a feeling moving through a human body, asking to be seen and held with care. This unconditional warmth reaches its peak when we learn to practice the power of yes. We spend the vast majority of our lives whispering a rigid, tense no to our reality. We say no to physical discomfort. We say no to our aging bodies. We say no to the people who disappoint us. We say no to our own loneliness. This continuous, subconscious resistance creates a permanent state of tension, keeping our hearts armored and our minds narrow. Picture yourself stranded in a chaotic airport. Your flight has been delayed for the 4th time. The air is stale, the seats are painfully hard, the passengers around you are loud and irritable, and you are nursing a throbbing headache. Your entire being is shouting a massive, furious no to the situation. You resent the airline, you hate the crowds, you are furious at the wasted time. This intense resistance does not make the plane arrive any faster, but it absolutely guarantees that you will suffer through every single second of the wait. The resistance makes your muscles ache, your headache spike, and your exhaustion feel unbearable. Now, imagine taking a deep breath and intentionally shifting that internal resistance. You decide to say yes. You are not saying yes to the airline's incompetence, and you are not saying you enjoy being stranded. You are simply agreeing to the unavoidable reality of the present moment. You say yes to the throbbing in your temples. You say yes to the noise of the crowd. You say yes to your own overwhelming crankiness. You mentally open your arms to the entire miserable experience. The moment you stop fighting reality, the suffering immediately softens. The rigid, suffocating walls of your frustration collapse into a spacious, allowing sky. The headache is still there, the delay is still real, but you are no longer a prisoner of your own rage. You have invited the discomfort to tea, and in doing so, you have reclaimed your peace. We can bring this same spirit of yes to the deepest, darkest corners of our own psyche. When the haunting feeling of unworthiness arises, we do not have to chase it away. We can mentally wrap a warm blanket around it. We can treat our own brokenness as a beloved guest. We are so accustomed to comparing our messy, unpredictable lives to some hidden, unreachable standard of perfection. We want to be the flawless partner, the infinitely patient parent, the endlessly successful professional. We want a life with no dirty dishes, no awkward silences, and no embarrassing mistakes. But that perfect life is a ghost. It does not exist. When we stop comparing our actual lives to an impossible fantasy, we can finally taste the vibrant, staggering beauty of what is real. We can look at our chaotic mornings, our flawed relationships, and our own deeply imperfect hearts, and we can say yes. We can recognize that this messy, breathing, aching, joyful human experience is not a problem to be solved. It is a miracle to be lived. And it begins the moment we decide to look at ourselves exactly as we are and offer nothing but absolute, unconditional warmth. Chapter 4. Grounding yourself in the present moment. For the vast majority of our lives, most of us operate as if we are simply floating heads. We live entirely from the neck up, completely captivated by the endless, swirling theater of our own thoughts. We treat our bodies as mere vehicles, biological machines whose only real purpose is to carry our brains from one meeting to the next, from the couch to the bed, from one worry to another. Unless our bodies are screaming at us with intense physical pain or thrilling us with extreme pleasure, we barely register their existence. We are so mesmerized by our plans, our memories, and our anxieties that we completely miss out on the vivid, thrumming reality of our direct sensory experience. This profound disconnection from our physical form is the very foundation of our suffering. To understand the cost of this disconnection, imagine a man sitting down to dinner with his family after a long, demanding day. The room is warm, the food on his plate is deeply nourishing, and his children are laughing at a story his partner is telling. By all external measures, he is entirely safe and surrounded by love. But internally, he's 1,000 miles away. He's completely consumed by a financial discrepancy he noticed at work hours ago. He's mentally drafting emails he will send tomorrow, rehearsing defensive conversations, and calculating worst-case scenarios that end in his own professional ruin. While his mind spins this catastrophic web, his body is reacting as if he is being hunted by a predator. His jaw is locked. His shoulders are pulled up tightly toward his ears, creating a heavy, aching knot of tension in his upper back. His breath is shallow, barely moving past his collarbone, and a cold, acidic knot of dread sits heavily in his stomach. But because he is living entirely in his mind, he does not notice a single one of these physical sensations. He simply feels a vague, suffocating sense of doom. He eats his meal mechanically, not tasting a single bite. He nods at his family, but he does not hear their voices. He is entirely severed from the living, breathing reality of the present moment, trapped instead in a terrifying, fabricated future. This happens to all of us constantly. The mind and the body are not separate entities. They are a profoundly interconnected loop, The moment we experience an uncomfortable physical sensation, a flutter of nervousness in the chest, a tightness in the throat, a heavy sinking in the gut, our brain instantly registers it as a threat. Instead of simply feeling the sensation, our mind leaps into action, frantically generating stories to explain the discomfort and strategies to escape it. This is the waterfall of reactivity. We feel a subtle physical ache of loneliness, and within a fraction of a second, we are lost in a cascading mental narrative about how we will always be alone, how we are unlovable, and how we must immediately distract ourselves to avoid the pain. The physical sensation triggers the story, and the terrifying story then amplifies the physical sensation, locking us into a miserable, self-perpetuating cycle. The only way to break this agonizing loop is to drop below the level of the story and come home to the raw, physical reality of the body. We must learn to step out of the spinning narrative of the mind and anchor our attention in the actual biological sensations of the present moment. When we first attempt this, it can be incredibly intimidating. We avoid our bodies precisely because the body is where our pain lives. It is the storehouse of our unexpressed grief, our ancient fears, and our deepest insecurities. When we finally slow down and drop our awareness into our physical form, we might encounter a terrifying intensity of feeling. We might feel the sharp, burning edges of an anger we have suppressed for decades. We might feel the hollow, aching cavern of a sorrow we have refused to mourn. Because our culture has taught us to view all pain as an enemy, as a sign that something is fundamentally wrong, our instinct is to flee. We want to numb it, medicate it, or instantly retreat back into the familiar detached safety of our overactive minds. But there is a profound difference between pain and suffering. Pain is an unavoidable reality of the human experience. Bodies get injured, hearts get broken, and life delivers staggering losses. Suffering, however, is entirely optional. Suffering is what happens when we resist our pain, when we tighten our bodies against it, and when we tell ourselves terrifying stories about what the pain means. Consider a fiercely independent woman who has built her entire identity around her physical strength. She is a dedicated marathon runner, and her self-worth is deeply tied to her ability to push her body to its absolute limits. One morning, during a routine training run, she steps off a curb incorrectly and suffers a catastrophic, career-ending tear in her knee. The immediate physical pain is excruciating. It is a blinding, white-hot agony radiating through her leg. That is the raw pain of the injury. But as she lies on the pavement waiting for help, the suffering begins. Her mind launches into a terrifying, devastating narrative. She tells herself that her body has betrayed her. She tells herself that without running, she's weak, directionless, and invisible. She visualizes a future where she's perpetually limited, gaining weight, losing her community, and spiraling into depression. She fights the reality of the injury with every ounce of her spirit, tightening her entire body in a rigid, furious resistance against the pain. This mental and emotional resistance acts like an amplifier, turning the physical ache in her knee into an all-consuming psychological torment. She's no longer just dealing with torn ligaments, she's battling the total collapse of her identity. What would happen if she could separate the raw, physical sensation from the terrifying story? What if, as she lay there, she consciously released the tight, desperate grip of her narrative and simply brought her full, compassionate attention to the knee itself? If she could drop her awareness directly into the injury, she would notice that the pain is not a solid, immovable block of agony. She would feel that it is actually a changing, fluid landscape. There is heat, there is throbbing, there is a sharp, pulsing pressure that rises and falls with the rhythm of her heartbeat. By meeting these raw sensations with a gentle, non-reactive presence, she stops fueling the fire of her own suffering. She does not tell herself that the pain means her life is over. She simply allows the pain to exist as a biological reality in the present moment. The pain does not miraculously disappear, but the agonizing, suffocating layer of suffering dissolves. The tight, terrified fist of her resistance unclenches. She's no longer a victim, fighting a war against her own body. She's a deeply grounded human being, offering profound care to a wounded part of herself. This is the miracle of coming home to the body. When we stop trying to manage our lives from the detached control tower of the mind and instead bravely descend into the landscape of our physical sensations, we discover a profound, unshakable sanctuary. We realize that our emotions, no matter how intense or frightening, are not permanent, solid things. They are simply waves of energy, vibrating, pulsing, and moving through our nervous system. When you feel a sudden surge of anxiety, you do not have to become the anxiety. You do not have to let it dictate your actions or define your worth. You can pause, close your eyes, and locate the exact physical manifestation of that anxiety. You can feel the tightness in your throat and the heat in your chest. You can observe these sensations with a gentle, curious attention, recognizing that they are just weather patterns moving through the vast open sky of your awareness. You can allow them to rise, peak, and naturally fade away without ever needing to tell a story about them. For those who have experienced deep trauma, returning to the body can feel like entering a burning building. When past pain has been too overwhelming to bear, the mind executes a brilliant protective maneuver. It vacates the premises. It severs the connection to the body to ensure psychological survival. If you have spent years living outside of your physical form to protect yourself, the journey back must be undertaken with immense gentleness and immense patience. You do not force the doors open. You slowly, incrementally invite your awareness back into your hands, your feet, the gentle rise and fall of your belly. You re-establish safety one breath at a time, and every time you successfully feel a physical sensation and meet it with warmth instead of panic, you reclaim a piece of your stolen life. When we finally inhabit our bodies fully, a breathtaking transformation occurs. We realize that we are not isolated, broken fragments struggling to survive in a hostile universe. When we quiet the mind and truly feel the pulsing, vibrating energy within our own hands and hearts, we recognize that this is the exact same energy that flows through the roots of ancient trees, the crashing waves of the ocean, and the lungs of the people we love. The boundary between ourselves and the rest of the world begins to soften. By fully entering the reality of our physical bodies, we discover that we are already home, already whole, and deeply connected to the vibrant, unfolding miracle of life itself. Chapter 5. Transforming Our Deepest Longings. There is a restless, relentless itch that lives just beneath the surface of our daily lives. It is the persistent, gnawing sensation that we need something more to finally feel complete. We feel it when we are standing in front of an open refrigerator late at night, searching for a specific taste we cannot quite identify. We feel it when we constantly refresh our phones, hoping for a message that will suddenly make us feel valued. We feel it in our careers, in our bank accounts, and in our relationships. It is the heavy, driving force of desire. And for most of us, desire is a source of immense confusion and profound suffering. We have been conditioned to view our cravings as evidence of our own weakness. We believe that if we were truly disciplined or truly enlightened, we would not want so much. We view our hunger for success, for intimacy, for comfort, for recognition as a flaw that must be violently suppressed or tightly managed. But this is a tragic misunderstanding of our own biology and our own spirit. Desire is not an enemy. It is the fundamental energy of life itself. The exact same gravitational pull that holds the planets in orbit is the force that pulls human beings toward connection, toward creation, and toward survival. Our desire for happiness is, at its absolute core, a beautiful and necessary urge to fully exist. The suffering we experience does not come from the fact that we want things. The suffering comes from how our minds desperately fixate on temporary external substitutes to heal an internal wound of unworthiness. When we feel fundamentally disconnected or insecure, a specific identity forms within us, the wanting self. The wanting self operates from a place of sheer panic. It believes that it is inherently empty, and it urgently searches the outside world for something anything to fill the void. Imagine a dedicated digital creator who embarks on a grueling 100-day challenge to release a new piece of content every single morning. They are intensely ambitious. They study international audience trends late into the night, constantly analyzing data to optimize their reach and maximize their revenue metrics. On the surface, this looks like incredible discipline and focus, but beneath the surface, the wanting self has completely taken over the driver's seat. The creator is no longer making art out of joy or a desire to share. They are producing out of a terrified desperation to prove their own value. They begin to tie their entire self-worth to the fluctuating graphs on an analytics dashboard. When the numbers climb, they feel a temporary, intoxicating surge of relief. They feel for a fleeting second that they matter. But the moment the views dip, a hollow, agonizing ache opens up in their chest. They sacrifice their sleep, their relationships, and their peace of mind, chained to a glowing screen, chasing a mathematical metric that promises salvation, but only delivers a temporary high. This is the tragedy of pursuing substitutes. We take our profound, beautiful yearning for love, for belonging, and for true purpose, and we attach it to things that can never actually satisfy us. We try to fill a spiritual void with money, with food, with the perfect physical appearance, or with the endless applause of strangers. These substitutes might provide a momentary distraction from the raw pain of our own insecurity, but they are like drinking salt water to cure a raging thirst. The more we consume, the more desperately dehydrated we become. We see this exact same dynamic play out in our romantic lives. Think of someone who goes on a single, pleasant date and instantly begins constructing an entire, elaborate future in their mind. Within days, they have imagined the vacations they will take, the home they will share, and the deep, flawless understanding they will have of one another. They are not actually connecting with the flawed, complex human being sitting across from them. They are attaching their desperate, aching need for salvation onto a fantasy. When reality inevitably breaks through the illusion, when the other person is late, or distant, or simply imperfect, the devastation is absolute. The wanting self feels betrayed, plunging right back into the familiar, suffocating darkness of feeling unlovable. When our desires spiral out of control and begin destroying our peace, our instinctive reaction is to turn on ourselves with vicious cruelty. We hate our lack of willpower. We declare war on our own appetites. We try to starve the wanting self into submission through rigid diets, brutal self-criticism, or emotional withdrawal. We mistakenly believe that if we can just become numb, we will finally be safe. But numbing our desire is a terrible mistake. If you successfully kill your capacity to want, you also kill your capacity to love, to create, and to feel joy. You turn your heart into a frozen stone. There is a completely different path. We do not have to blindly indulge our cravings, and we do not have to violently repress them. We can learn to meet the sheer, staggering force of our own desire with radical, unwavering acceptance. When an intense craving strikes, whether it is the urge to check your metrics for the 50th time, the compulsion to numb out with food, or the desperate ache to hear from someone who is pulling away, you must stop. You must pause your physical momentum and step out of the frantic narrative playing in your head. Do not tell yourself a story about how weak you are. Instead, drop your attention directly into the physical reality of the craving. What does wanting actually feel like in your body? It is often an incredibly uncomfortable, highly charged sensation. You might feel a frantic, vibrating energy in your chest. You might feel a tight, painful gripping in your throat, or a heavy, sinking emptiness in your stomach. Feel the physical burn of the desire without trying to fix it, feed it, or push it away. And in the midst of that intense physical storm, offer yourself a profoundly radical thought. It is not my fault that I feel this way. You did not choose your biology. You did not choose the childhood wounds that left you feeling empty. You did not choose to live in a culture that constantly profits off your insecurities. The intense craving moving through your body is a natural, conditioned response to pain. By removing the heavy, toxic layer of shame and blame, you create a space of immense, grace. You are no longer a broken person failing a test of willpower. You are simply a human being experiencing a wave of intense energy. When you sit in the fire of wanting without reacting, something miraculous begins to happen. The frantic, desperate edge of the craving begins to soften and dissolve. As the surface layer of obsession burns away, it reveals the exquisite, tender truth hidden beneath it. You discover your deepest longing. Beneath the desperate grab for professional success is a pure, beautiful longing to contribute to the world and know that your life has meaning. Beneath the compulsive urge to overeat is a deep, innocent longing to feel comforted, safe, and held. Beneath the obsessive romantic fantasy is a profound, holy longing to experience true communion with another soul. When we finally stop chasing the endless, exhausting parade of substitutes, we can turn our attention to the longing itself. We can allow ourselves to feel the vast, breathtaking immensity of our own desire. We can surrender to the yearning, letting it expand until it breaks our hearts wide open. In that profound surrender, we realize that the love, the peace, and the connection we have been so desperately searching for in the outside world has actually been living inside us the entire time. By embracing the fullness of what we want, we finally discover the radiant, unshakable fullness of who we are. Chapter 6. Confronting Fear with an Open Heart. Fear is the most primal and paralyzing of all human emotions. We all know the physical grip of it, the sudden, suffocating tightness in the throat, the frantic, hollow fluttering in the stomach, the rapid, shallow breathing that signals we are in imminent danger. On a purely biological level, this physical response is brilliant and absolutely necessary. It is the ancient survival mechanism designed to flood our extremities with blood so we can fight a predator or flee for our lives. But for most of us, this life-saving biological alarm system has become permanently jammed in the on position. We are no longer running from physical predators. We are running from the possibility of failure, the threat of rejection, and the agonizing prospect of loss. When this emotion runs continuously in the background of our lives, we enter a debilitating state of existence. We become trapped in the trance of fear. In this trance, our entire identity contracts. We forget our strength, our connections, and our capacity for joy, reducing ourselves to a bundle of tense muscles entirely dedicated to defending our existence. We spend our precious time and energy building elaborate fortresses to protect our lives rather than actually living them. Imagine a highly respected professional whose days are consumed by a quiet, invisible terror. On the outside, they are the pillar of competence, always early, always prepared, always accommodating. But internally, they feel as though they are desperately managing a pack of starving wild dogs locked in a basement. They live in perpetual dread that they will make a single mistake, utter the wrong word in a meeting, or slightly disappoint a colleague, and the basement door will burst open, unleashing total ruin. This fear dictates every single move they make. They shrink themselves, avoiding spontaneous conversations or new opportunities, mistakenly believing that if they remain perfectly small and perfectly compliant, they will remain safe. But shrinking does not create safety. It only amplifies the agonizing, suffocating feeling of isolation. When we trace our anxieties back to their absolute origin, we find that every single fear we possess is ultimately rooted in the fear of separation and loss. We are terrified of losing our status, losing our loved ones, losing our health, and ultimately losing our very existence. To avoid this overwhelming prospect, we numb ourselves, we build massive emotional walls, and we lose ourselves in frantic, obsessive attempts to control the uncontrollable. The journey out of this paralyzing trance begins by establishing a fundamental sense of safety. You cannot force a terrified mind to relax simply by demanding that it stop being afraid. You must first find a refuge. A refuge is a safe haven where your exhausted, frightened heart can finally put down its heavy armor and rest. This might be the physical presence of a deeply trusted friend who listens to your darkest insecurities without a shred of judgment. It might be a quiet, solitary place in nature where the immense, silent strength of ancient trees reminds you that you are part of a massive, enduring world. Or it might be the conscious internal act of placing your hand over your own heart and silently offering yourself unwavering compassion. By intentionally taking refuge, you break the excruciating illusion that you are entirely alone in a hostile universe. Once you have established this baseline of safety, you can begin to alter how you interact with the fear itself. When panic strikes, our vision narrows to a tiny, suffocating pinhole. We become entirely obsessed with the threat. To break this, we must consciously widen the lens of our awareness. Imagine sitting on a vast, open park bench. Instead of letting the fear crush you from the inside, visualize taking the physical sensation of the fear out of your body and placing it gently on the bench right next to you. Acknowledge it. Say a friendly, gentle hello to it. Then, physically, look up and out. Notice the immense, sweeping expanse of the sky. Listen to the distant, ambient sounds of life moving all around you. By deliberately expanding your awareness to include the vastness of the world, the fear does not magically disappear, but it instantly loses its suffocating power. It is no longer the entirety of your existence. It is simply a small, frightened guest sitting with you in a boundless open room. The final, most transformative step requires immense, breathtaking courage. To be genuinely free, you must eventually stop leaning away from your fear and choose to lean directly into it. Think of someone who has spent years emotionally numbing themselves to avoid the agonizing memory of a profound personal loss. They have disconnected entirely from their body, mistakenly believing that if they do not feel the pain cannot destroy them. But the numbness itself becomes a miserable prison. To break free, they must deliberately turn toward the terror. They must drop the protective mental stories and plunge directly into the raw physical sensations of the panic they have spent a lifetime outrunning. When you choose to lean into fear, you will feel the absolute rawness of your own biology. You will feel the searing heat, the violent trembling, and the crushing pressure in your chest. It will feel as if you are stepping off a cliff into a dark abyss, utterly convinced that the intensity of the sensation will shatter you. But this is the ultimate, magnificent illusion of fear. If you refuse to fight it, if you surrender your desperate need to control it, and simply allow the terrifying sensations to burn through you without resistance, a breathtaking miracle occurs. The frantic, thundering chaos suddenly breaks, giving way to an unimaginably deep, vast stillness. You realize that the fear was never going to destroy you. Facing fear is the ultimate, profound training in how to let go. We spend our lives building elaborate fortresses to keep the pain out, not realizing that those very walls are what keep us trapped in the dark. When we finally stop fighting the energy of fear, it loses its monstrous shape and dissolves seamlessly into the boundless, radiant sea of our own awareness. We discover that beneath our deepest terrors lies an indestructible, open heart, entirely capable of holding the entirety of our human experience with magnificent grace. Chapter 7. The Radiance of True Compassion. There is a strange and devastating habit that almost all of us share. When we experience failure, when we feel vulnerable, or when we make a painful mistake, our immediate response is rarely to offer ourselves comfort. Instead, we instinctively distance ourselves from our own emotional pain by covering it over with a thick, suffocating layer of self-judgment. We become our own most ruthless critics. We mistakenly believe that if we punish ourselves severely enough, we can somehow correct our flaws and prevent future suffering, but treating our hearts and bodies with such relentless impatience and hostility only digs us deeper into the exhausting feeling that we are fundamentally unworthy. We cannot genuinely accept our experiences if our hearts have been hardened by fear and self-blame. True healing requires two distinct wings to take flight: the clear seeing of our pain and the absolute unwavering warmth of compassion. Compassion is the profound capacity to be with, feel with, and suffer with our own tender wounds. It requires us to stop running from our pain and instead deliberately bring our attention to it, responding with the exact same kindness we would instinctively offer a devastated friend. Yet offering this kind of care to ourselves often feels deeply unfamiliar and even embarrassing. We have been conditioned to view self-compassion as self-indulgent, fearing that if we are gentle with ourselves, we will become weak or complacent. But this revolutionary act of treating ourselves tenderly is the only force powerful enough to undo the toxic, aversive messages we have accumulated over a lifetime. Imagine someone who has just endured a massive, shattering life transition, such as the collapse of a marriage or the loss of a defining career. For months, they have been carrying a crushing weight of guilt and self-recrimination. They cannot sleep, their body aches with chronic tension, and their mind is a relentless loop of accusations about how they should have been smarter, better, or more attentive. They are completely alienated from their own suffering because they are entirely focused on prosecuting themselves. Now, imagine this exhausted person finally stopping. They sit in the quiet of their room, and instead of launching into another mental tirade, they physically place a warm hand directly over their own aching heart. They take a deep breath and whisper a simple, radical truth. This hurts, and I care about this suffering. In that single breathtaking moment of kindness, the heavy iron cords of self-blame begin to snap. By acknowledging the reality of their pain without immediately condemning it, their shoulders drop. The tears that have been frozen behind a wall of anger finally begin to fall. They are no longer split into two opposing forces, the harsh judge and the pathetic victim. Through the power of profound self-compassion, they seamlessly become both the holder and the held. They provide their own sanctuary. As the defensive armor melts away, they discover a courageous openness and a capacity for genuine tenderness that they never knew they possessed. This internal softening is not the final destination. It is merely the gateway. When we stop struggling against our own lives and allow our hearts to be touched by our own suffering, a magnificent transformation occurs. Our vision begins to change. The compassion we cultivate within ourselves naturally and inevitably overflows, widening its circle to encompass the rest of the world. Once we intimately know the texture of our own fear and sorrow, we can suddenly recognize those exact same burdens in the people around us. Think of a time when you were locked in a bitter, escalating conflict with someone you love or a difficult colleague at work. When we operate from a place of internal hostility, we only see the other person's abrasive exterior. We see their sharp words, their defensive posture, and their infuriating stubbornness, and we instantly armor up to protect ourselves. We view them as an obstacle, an enemy, or a threat. But when our own hearts have been softened by self-compassion, we possess a new, piercing clarity. We look past the aggressive facade and realize that their anger is nothing more than a desperate shield. Beneath their harshness, we see a frightened, insecure human being who is secretly terrified of not being enough, of losing control, or of being unloved. We recognize that they are trapped in the exact same painful trance that we have fought so hard to escape. This profound realization shifts everything. Instead of meeting their defensiveness with more armor, we can meet it with a quiet, grounded presence. We no longer need to violently protect ourselves because we understand that their hostility is born of their own suffering, not ours. We can listen without planning our counterattack. We can offer a gentle response instead of a sharp rebuttal. This does not mean we tolerate abuse or abandon our boundaries. It means we refuse to let the pain of the world harden our own hearts. We adopt the highest aspiration of the human spirit, the intention that absolutely all circumstances, even the most agonizing conflicts, serve to awaken our compassion. True compassion is not a finite resource that is depleted when we give it away. It is an infinitely renewable, radiant energy. When we practice responding to our own inevitable pain with profound kindness, we dissolve the illusion that we are separate from the rest of humanity. We discover that every single human being is carrying a heavy load, and that our shared vulnerability is not a weakness, but the ultimate, unbreakable bond. By allowing our hearts to be wide open to the suffering of the world, we step out of our isolation and into the radiant, fearless truth of who we really are. Chapter 8. unlocking forgiveness through inherent goodness. Think for a moment about a heavy physical weight, perhaps a large, jagged stone. Imagine placing that stone into a backpack and strapping it tightly to your shoulders. For the first few hours, you can manage the load, you adjust your posture, you bear down, and you keep walking. But as days turn into weeks and weeks turn into years, that stone dictates every movement you make. It exhausts your muscles, it grinds down your joints, and it prevents you from ever running freely or standing completely tall. This is exactly what we do to our hearts when we refuse to forgive. We carry our past hurts, our resentments, and our bitter grudges as if they are protective armor, mistakenly believing that holding on to the pain will somehow shield us from ever being injured again. But resentment is not a shield. It is a poison. It is the act of drinking venom every single day and hoping the other person will die. When we are deeply hurt, our minds execute a swift and brutal categorization. We label the person who injured us as fundamentally bad. We strip them of their humanity and reduce them entirely to the pain they caused us. We become locked in a rigid trance of hostility, viewing the world as a dangerous battlefield populated by enemies who must be guarded against. Imagine two close friends who decide to build a business together from the ground up. They share a vision and they pour their entire lives into the pursuit of that dream. They endure sleepless nights, financial panic, and the grueling friction of startup life, completely relying on one another for survival. Years later, just as the company is on the precipice of massive, life-changing success, one partner secretly manipulates the legal contracts. In a calculated, ruthless move, they force the other partner out, seizing the majority of the financial reward and the public credit for themselves. The betrayed partner is left completely shattered. The deception becomes an all-consuming fire. Every single morning, they wake up with a jaw so tight it aches, their mind instantly replaying the betrayal. They sit at the dinner table with their family, physically present but emotionally a million miles away, entirely absorbed in dark fantasies of exposing and destroying the person who ruined their life. This bitterness feels entirely justified. It feels like a necessary, righteous anger. But as the years grind on, this justified rage calcifies into a heavy, suffocating depression. The betrayed partner cannot enjoy their new endeavors, they cannot trust new colleagues, and they cannot experience simple joy because their internal landscape is entirely occupied by the ghost of their former friend. The armor has not protected them, it has entombed them. How does a person possibly break out of a tomb this thick? It requires a radical structural shift in how we view human nature. We must look past the destructive actions and see the deeply frightened, conditioned animal operating underneath. The partner who stole the company did not do so out of a pure, joyful malice. They did it out of a profound, unexamined terror. They were driven by a desperate scarcity mindset. A fear of not having enough, a terror of being insignificant, and a desperate need to hoard control to feel safe. This realization does not excuse the theft. It does not mean the betrayer should ever be trusted with a business again, and it certainly does not mean the victim should not pursue legal justice. But recognizing the pathetic, agonizing suffering that drives a person to betray their closest friend completely changes the internal temperature of the anger. It softens the hard, jagged edges of the hatred. To truly unlock forgiveness, we must embrace the concept of inherent goodness. Beneath the trauma, beneath the defensive posturing, and beneath the deeply selfish conditioning, every single human being possesses a core of pure, radiant awareness. It is an innate capacity for love that can be heavily obscured, but never permanently destroyed. Think of the sun hidden behind a thick, suffocating layer of dark storm clouds. From the ground, the sky looks entirely black, and you might easily believe the light has been extinguished forever, but the sun is still there, burning just as brightly, simply waiting for the weather to shift. When we recognize that a person's hurtful actions are simply the dark storm clouds of their own unhealed pain, we stop defining them by their worst moments. We acknowledge the sun hidden behind their storm. This brings us to the most crucial misunderstanding about forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a weak, passive surrender. It is not a pardon that says what happened was acceptable. It is a fierce, courageous, and entirely selfish act of liberation. It is the conscious, deliberate choice to no longer let another person's unhealed wounds dictate the state of your own heart. It is the breathtaking decision to unclench your fist and drop the burning coal you have been holding onto for years. This exact same profound process must be turned inward. For many of us, the hardest person in the world to forgive is the one staring back at us in the mirror. Think of a parent who went through a devastating, chaotic divorce while their children were young. In the midst of their own overwhelming grief, financial panic, and emotional exhaustion, they were absent. They were impatient, quick to yell over minor infractions, and completely unavailable to soothe their frightened children. Decades later, looking back at the undeniable damage done, the parent is consumed by a relentless, suffocating guilt. They view themselves as a fundamentally toxic person who irrevocably damaged the people they love most. Every time they try to move forward or find peace in their current life, their internal judge slams the gavel, declaring them forever unworthy of happiness because of their past failures. To forgive yourself, you must fiercely reconnect with your own inherent goodness. You must look back at that exhausted, overwhelmed parent and realize that they were not a monster. They were a deeply frightened human being, operating at the absolute limit of their emotional capacity, drowning in a storm of their own unresolved pain. You must offer that past version of yourself the exact same profound, unconditional warmth you would offer a weeping friend. You must see that your mistakes were not evidence of a dark, rotten core, but tragic expressions of your own immense suffering at the time. When you finally stop using your past as a weapon to destroy your present, the heavy, suffocating chains of guilt dissolve into the open air. When you unlock forgiveness, you reclaim your vital energy. You take off the heavy backpack of stones and realize how effortlessly you can breathe, how lightly you can walk. By recognizing the indestructible basic goodness within yourself and within the people who have hurt you, you stop treating your life as a hostile battlefield. You are finally free to love without the thick, heavy drag of resentment, and you walk forward with a heart that is remarkably strong, incredibly resilient, and breathtakingly open. Chapter 9. Deepening our connections with others. We all crave a deep, unquestioned experience of belonging, a profound desire to feel entirely at home with another human being. Yet, the very places where we most desperately seek this intimacy are often the places where we construct our thickest, most impenetrable walls. When we interact with the people we love the most, our partners, our family members, our closest friends, we rarely see them clearly. Instead, we view them through the distorted, terrifying lens of our own unmet needs and hidden insecurities. If they validate us, praise us, and meet our expectations, we feel a temporary rush of safety. But the moment they criticize us, withdraw their attention, or simply fail to anticipate our needs, our internal alarms trigger with devastating speed. We fall backward into the trance of unworthiness, entirely convinced that their behavior is absolute proof of our own fundamental inadequacy. In this panicked state of fear, we instantly transform the people we love into the enemy. We armor up to protect our fragile hearts from further injury. We withdraw into stony, punishing silence. We launch bitter defensive counterattacks, or we desperately try to manage and control their behavior so we can feel secure again. We stop relating to a living, breathing person and instead begin interacting entirely with our own projected fears. Think of two brothers who have shared a fierce, lifelong competitive rivalry. Even well into their adult years, whenever they sit down together to play a competitive video game, the room crackles with a heavy, unspoken tension. One evening, the older brother makes a sharp, dismissive comment about the younger brother's strategy and choice of tactics. Instantly, the younger brother feels a familiar, agonizing sting of shame in his chest. His mind races back through decades of similar interactions, instantly compiling a massive internal dossier of every single time he has felt belittled, criticized, and entirely inadequate in his brother's eyes. The script for this interaction is entirely predictable and deeply worn. The younger brother is supposed to fire back a sarcastic, cutting insult. They are supposed to escalate the argument, ruin the atmosphere of the entire evening, and retreat to their separate corners, tightly nursing their mutual resentments. They are completely trapped in a mechanical loop of suffering, each reacting blindly to their own internal wounds. But what if the younger brother chooses to shatter this destructive script? What if, as the heat rises in his face and the defensive retort burns on the tip of his tongue, he chooses to practice the sacred pause? He purposefully stops his physical momentum. He drops his attention out of his racing mind and directly into his own body, feeling the searing, uncomfortable reality of his own shame and anger without doing a single thing to act upon it. In that profound, quiet space of pausing, the heavy fog of the trance begins to lift. He realizes that his brother's critical comment is not actually a definitive ruling on his worth as a human being. It is simply a collection of words hanging in the air. As he takes a breath and brings unconditional warmth to his own internal pain, his vision clears. He looks across the room at his older brother, and instead of seeing an arrogant, towering adversary, he sees another flawed, highly vulnerable human being. He recognizes that his brother's constant, exhausting need to criticize and dominate is actually driven by a deep, unexamined fear of losing his own significance. He sees the fragile ego desperately hiding behind the competitive bravado because the younger brother has bravely embraced his own insecurity. He can suddenly recognize and feel genuine compassion for the exact same insecurity living inside his sibling. This clarity changes absolutely everything about how we connect with others. When we stop demanding that other people function as flawless mirrors to reflect our worth, we are finally free to see them as they truly are. The younger brother does not hurl an insult back. He simply takes a quiet breath, lets the critical comment dissolve in the empty air, and responds with a grounded, disarming honesty. He might simply smile and continue playing, refusing to pick up the rope in a tug of war. By refusing to engage in the defensive battle, he fundamentally alters the dynamic of the relationship. He creates a spacious, allowing environment where both of them can finally put down their heavy, exhausting armor. This practice of radical acceptance is the ultimate foundation of all genuine intimacy. You cannot deeply, truly connect with another person if you are constantly monitoring them for signs of your own failure. We must learn to invite our own fears, our jealousy, and our desperate need for approval to tea, treating them with absolute unwavering friendliness. When we become the compassionate holder of our own suffering, we stop demanding that our partners and friends do it for us. We stop holding them hostage to our own unresolved pain. Awakening together is not about finding perfect relationships entirely devoid of conflict. It is about bringing a fearless, open heart into the messy, unpredictable, and often painful reality of human connection. It is about looking directly into the eyes of another person and recognizing the exact same desperate longing for love, the exact same paralyzing fear of rejection, and the exact same radiant awareness that lives inside of you. When we relate to one another from this place of profound, shared humanity, the artificial walls of isolation crumble to the ground. We discover the breathtaking joy of truly belonging to each other, a magnificent realization that prepares us to step fully into the ultimate expression of our highest potential. Chapter 10. Stepping into your ultimate potential. Imagine you have spent your entire life living inside a tiny, heavily fortified room. You have spent decades patching the cracks in the walls, reinforcing the heavy locks, and vigilantly guarding the single door. This room represents the small, isolated identity we build for ourselves, the identity constructed from our fears, our past mistakes, our frantic achievements, and our desperate need for control. We become so utterly consumed with defending this tiny, fragile territory that we completely forget there is an entire, breathtaking universe waiting just outside. The absolute core of our suffering is this profound illusion of separation. We move through our days believing we are fundamentally cut off from the rest of existence, fighting a lonely battle against a world we assume is indifferent to our pain. But what happens when you finally stop defending the walls? What happens when you apply everything you have learned on this journey? When you utilize the sacred power of the pause, ground yourself deeply in the physical reality of your body, embrace the staggering force of your own desires, walk bravely into the fire of your fears, and bathe your deepest wounds in absolute, unconditional warmth. The heavy, artificial boundaries of that isolated self begin to dissolve. The locks unclick. The door swings open. You realize with a sudden and magnificent clarity that you do not need to fight reality anymore. You do not need to constantly monitor your worth because the war is finally over. To understand the magnitude of this shift, picture a person standing on the edge of a vast, roaring ocean, watching the surf crash against the shore. For their entire life, they have believed they are just a single, fragile wave. They spend their days terrified of losing their unique shape, frantically trying to rise higher than the waves beside them, and paralyzed by the agonizing knowledge that they will eventually hit the sand and disappear. They view every other wave as a competitor, and the shore as a terrifying executioner. This is the exhausting, heartbreaking tragedy of living entirely within the rigid confines of the ego. It is a life defined by the desperate, impossible attempt to hold on to a temporary form. But in a moment of profound stillness and radical acceptance, a breathtaking shift in perception occurs. As they let go of their frantic need to control their shape and simply surrender to the movement of the water, the ultimate truth is revealed. They realize they are not merely the wave, they are the entire ocean. The exact same water that temporarily forms their peak is the exact same water that stretches out to the infinite horizon. Their specific individual shape will naturally rise and fall, but their true essence, the vast, deep, luminous water itself, is indestructible and eternal. They are not separate from the ocean, they are a magnificent expression of it. This is exactly what it means to step into your ultimate potential. It is the glorious, liberating realization of your true nature. When you drop the heavy armor of your conditioning, you discover that you are not the limiting, cruel stories you have repeated to yourself in the dark. You are not the sum of your rejections. You are not your bank account, and you are not your temporary successes. You are the radiant, boundless awareness that patiently holds all of these passing experiences. You are the vast open sky, not the dark storm clouds temporarily passing through it. When you stop waging a relentless war against yourself, you instantly stop waging war against the world. Because you have learned to hold your own suffering with profound compassion, your heart naturally breaks wide open to the suffering of everyone around you. You step out of the tiny fortified room and into the magnificent, terrifying, beautiful expanse of reality. You no longer view other people as threats to your security or as tools to validate your worth. You see them as fellow waves in the exact same ocean. This realization does not make you passive or detached. It makes you incredibly brave. You are finally free to live with an open heart. You are free to engage with your work, your art, and your relationships with staggering passion because your fundamental sense of self is no longer at risk. You can love completely without the heavy drag of resentment or the frantic, suffocating grip of neediness. Stepping into your ultimate potential does not mean you will never feel pain, fear, or sadness again. You will still experience the full, messy, devastatingly beautiful spectrum of human emotion. You will still stumble and you will still face profound losses. But when the storms arrive, you will no longer be a victim trapped in a waking nightmare. You will meet the dark nights of the soul with the same radical, unwavering friendliness that you use to greet the dawn. You will not run. You will stay, you will breathe, and you will allow life to move completely through you. You do not need to become someone else to be worthy of this magnificent freedom. You do not need to finally achieve perfection, fix all your flaws, or secure a flawless future. You only need to drop the armor and arrive exactly where you are right now. The extraordinary journey of radical acceptance does not end with you finally earning your right to exist. It ends with the quiet, world-altering realization that you were already whole to begin with. The cage is open. The ocean is calling. It is time to step out and live.